In the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, in 1942, a cargo ship was sunk in less than 3 minutes. 54 men went into the water. One survived. For 133 days, he drifted alone on a wooden raft. No engine, no radio, no navigation. Only rainwater, raw fish, and open sea. The ocean did not release him. He simply endured it, day after day. The Atlantic Ocean stretches without boundary. In the early months of 1942, its surface carried merchant traffic, naval patrols, and the slow movement of weather systems that paid no attention to human conflict. The sea between West Africa and South America was wide, warm, and largely empty. For long distances, there were no shipping lanes in sight, no islands, and no landmarks that could be used for orientation. Currents moved westward, steady but unpredictable, shaped by wind and latitude rather than intent. At this latitude, the days were bright and the nights dark but clear. The sun rose quickly and fell with little warning. Heat accumulated on exposed surfaces. Rain arrived suddenly and departed just as fast. The ocean's surface could appear calm for hours, then shift into rolling swells without visible cause. From the height of a low vessel, the horizon formed a complete circle, unbroken in every direction. During the Second World War, this part of the Atlantic had become quietly dangerous. German submarines operated far from Europe, targeting unescorted cargo ships. Sinkings often occurred without warning and were rarely witnessed. Survivors, if there were any, drifted into a vast environment that offered no reference point and no assistance. In this setting, survival depended less on strength than on time, exposure, and chance. Once a person entered the water or a life craft, the ocean dictated all outcomes. There was no shelter, no reliable food source, and no certainty of discovery. Only distance, weather, and endurance remained. Poon Lim was born in 1918 on the Chinese island of Hainan, at a time when maritime work was one of the few reliable ways to earn income. The island's economy was closely tied to the sea. Fishing boats, cargo vessels, and foreign shipping companies offered employment that combined risk with opportunity. For many young men, work aboard ships was less a choice than a practical necessity. Lim received limited formal education. Like many of his peers, he learned practical skills early, including swimming, basic seamanship, and the handling of ropes and equipment. These were common abilities in coastal communities and were passed down through observation rather than instruction. They were not specialized survival skills, but they created familiarity with the physical realities of open water. In the late 1930s, as Japan expanded its military presence in China, economic conditions worsened. Employment became unstable. Lim left Hainan to seek work elsewhere, eventually traveling to Hong Kong. There, he found employment aboard British merchant vessels, which were increasingly short of crew as the war expanded. Racial discrimination was common. Chinese sailors were often paid less than European crew members, and were rarely assigned skilled positions. Lim worked as a steward, responsible for basic service duties rather than navigation or engineering. When the Second World War spread beyond Europe, merchant shipping became a strategic necessity. Cargo ships transported food, fuel, and materials across long distances, often without escort. The risk of attack increased steadily after 1941, especially in the Atlantic. Despite this, shipping companies continued operations with limited protection. Crew members were aware of the danger but had few alternatives. Lim signed on to the British cargo ship SS Benlomond in late 1941. The vessel was unarmed and sailed alone. Its route carried it from Cape Town towards Suriname, then part of the Dutch colony of Suriname, before continuing north. Lim's role aboard the ship remained unchanged. He was not trained for emergency command and had no authority over ship operations. His responsibilities were confined to routine service work. Life aboard the Ben Lomond was uneventful in the weeks before the sinking. The ship maintained a steady pace. Watches were kept, but there were no escorts and no radio warnings that altered the voyage. The ocean remained the dominant presence, and the war existed mostly as an abstract threat. For Lim, survival meant performing assigned tasks and waiting for the journey to end. He had no reason to expect that he would soon be alone at sea. On the morning of November 23, 1942, the SS Benlomond was moving westward across the South Atlantic. The ship was approximately 750 miles east of the mouth of the Amazon River. Weather conditions were stable, visibility was clear. There was no immediate indication of danger. At approximately 8:30 a.m., without warning, a torpedo struck the ship. It had been fired by the German submarine U-722, commanded by Kapitänleutnant Karl Emmermann. The explosion occurred on the port side. The impact was decisive. The Ben Lomond was unarmed and traveling alone. There was no opportunity to maneuver or respond. The blast destroyed critical sections of the ship's hull. The engine room flooded almost immediately. The vessel began to sink rapidly. Accounts indicate that the ship went down in less than 3 minutes. There was no time to send a distress signal. No coordinated evacuation took place. Lim was below deck when the torpedo struck. The force of the explosion threw him against a bulkhead. He made his way upward as the ship listed sharply. By the time he reached the deck, lifeboats were already inaccessible or destroyed. Crew members were entering the water, but the chaos allowed for no organized assistance. Lim jumped into the sea wearing a life jacket. Debris from the ship floated around him. Oil spread across the surface. Within minutes, the Ben Lomond disappeared beneath the water. Of the 54 people aboard, Lim was the only known survivor. After some time in the water, Lim located a wooden Carley float. The raft was square, low to the water, and designed to support survivors without requiring inflation. He pulled himself onto it. The float carried a small emergency kit, including tins of water, hard biscuits, pemmican, sugar cubes, lime juice tablets, chocolate, and flares. The ocean around him returned to silence. The submarine did not surface. No rescue followed. Lim was alone. Once the Ben Lomond was gone, the raft became the entirety of Lim's environment. It measured roughly 8 feet square and sat low in the water. There was no canopy. The surface was hard and offered no insulation from heat during the day or from cold at night. Movement was limited. Standing was possible only briefly and required careful balance. Most of the time, Lim remained seated or lying flat. The emergency supplies were modest but organized. There were several tins of fresh water, hardtack biscuits, pemmican, sugar cubes, chocolate, and lime juice tablets intended to prevent scurvy. There were also signal flares, but no radio, no sail, and no means of propulsion. The raft drifted according to wind and current. Lim had no way to influence its direction. From the beginning, he treated the supplies as a fixed system rather than a temporary reserve. He rationed the food carefully, calculating that the packaged provisions could last several weeks if consumed in minimal quantities. Water was the most critical resource. He limited himself to small daily amounts, even in the heat. During the first weeks, he consumed the emergency supplies as intended, without knowing how long he would be adrift. Exposure was constant. During daylight hours, the sun reflected off the water and the raft's surface. Lim had no hat or protective clothing. His skin blistered and peeled. At night, temperatures dropped. Rainstorms brought brief relief from heat, but also discomfort. He learned quickly to collect rainwater by spreading canvas and using containers from the emergency kit. Rain became a primary source of fresh water once the stored supply was exhausted. As the days passed, Lim began to supplement his rations with food obtained from the sea. The emergency kit included no fishing equipment. Using materials available on the raft, he adapted what he could. He straightened a nail from the raft's structure to form a hook. Threads were pulled from his clothing and twisted into a line. Biscuit crumbs and fish entrails were used as bait when available. Fishing required patience and timing. Small fish approached the raft periodically. Larger fish appeared less often, but provided more substantial nourishment. Lim consumed the fish raw. He dried portions in the sun when possible to extend their usefulness. This practice reduced waste and allowed him to eat more regularly without exhausting any single source. Birds became another occasional source of food. Seabirds landed on the raft at intervals, especially during periods of calm. Lim caught them by hand when they came within reach. He used the birds' flesh for food and their blood as a source of moisture when water was scarce. Bones and feathers were discarded. These acts were practical rather than opportunistic. Each resource was used with restraint. Sharks were a constant presence. They circled the raft frequently, drawn by movement and discarded remains. Lim did not attempt to kill them. He remained still when they approached closely and avoided unnecessary activity in the water. On one occasion, he caught a small shark using his improvised hook. He killed it with limited tools and used its meat as food. The act was carried out methodically and without excess. It was not repeated often. Time passed without clear markers. Lim did not have a calendar or clock. Days were measured by sunrise and sunset. Weeks blended together. He tracked the passage of time by changes in his supplies and by the physical condition of his body. Weight loss was gradual but continuous. Muscle mass declined. Movements became slower. Despite this, he maintained daily routines. Each day followed a similar structure. At sunrise, he adjusted his position to minimize exposure. He checked for rain clouds. Fishing was done during specific hours when fish were more active. Food preparation was minimal. He cleaned wounds when possible, using salt water and exposure to sunlight. Salt sores developed on his skin from constant contact with seawater. Healing was slow. Mental discipline became part of survival. Lim avoided unnecessary actions. He conserved energy by limiting movement and speech. He did not shout or attempt to signal aircraft unless they were close. On several occasions, ships passed at a distance without noticing the raft. At least one aircraft flew overhead without altering course. Lim used flares sparingly, understanding that they were finite and only effective if seen. Navigation was not possible in any meaningful way. Lim had no compass and no map. He observed the sun and stars, but could not determine his position accurately. The raft drifted westward, influenced by the south equatorial current. This movement was gradual and imperceptible on a daily basis. There was no assurance that land lay ahead. Illness and injury were constant risks. Lim developed sores on his legs and back. Exposure weakened his immune system. Despite this, he avoided panic. His actions remained repetitive and deliberate. He focused on immediate needs rather than long-term outcomes. There was no clear expectation of rescue or landfall. After several weeks, the emergency food was gone. Survival depended entirely on what the ocean provided. Rain became less frequent. Some days passed without fresh water. During these periods, Lim reduced activity further. He used minimal speech and remained still for long stretches. The raft itself deteriorated slowly. Wood absorbed water. Joints loosened. Despite this, it remained afloat. Lim performed basic maintenance when possible, adjusting loose sections and redistributing weight. These actions were minor but necessary to prevent sudden failure. There were moments of heightened risk. Rough seas threatened to overturn the raft. Strong sun exposure caused dehydration. At no point was there a single dramatic event that defined survival. Instead, endurance was built from accumulation. Each day extended the previous one. By the third month, Lim's physical condition had visibly declined. His skin was darkened and damaged. His weight had dropped significantly. Despite this, he continued his routines. Fishing lines were reset. Rainwater was collected when possible. Food was consumed in small portions. Survival became procedural. There was no sense of progress, only continuation. The ocean remained unchanged. The horizon stayed distant. The raft drifted. As the weeks extended into months, Lim's condition entered a more fragile phase. The routines that had sustained him continued, but their effectiveness diminished. Fishing success became irregular. Some days yielded small fish, others produced nothing. Rainfall became less predictable. Periods of dehydration lengthened. His body adapted by slowing further, conserving energy at the expense of strength. Salt sores worsened. Open wounds formed where skin remained in constant contact with wet wood. Infection was a concern, but there was no treatment beyond exposure to sunlight and rinsing with seawater. Healing, when it occurred, was incomplete. Pain became a persistent condition rather than an acute problem. Mental strain increased quietly. There was no external stimulus beyond the movement of water and sky. The absence of sound other than wind and waves removed any sense of variation. Days became indistinguishable. Lim later stated that he avoided counting time deliberately. Measurement, he believed, would increase frustration without providing control. Attempts at signaling became rarer. Flares were nearly exhausted. Ships passed at distances that made signaling ineffective. On at least one occasion, a vessel altered course slightly but did not approach. Whether the raft was seen or mistaken for debris could not be determined. Each missed opportunity reduced expectation. Food intake declined. Lim consumed fish whenever possible, but his ability to catch them weakened. His hands lost strength. Reaction time slowed. He adjusted by focusing on smaller, more frequent catches rather than attempting larger prey. Birds became less frequent. When they appeared, he captured them with reduced efficiency. Physical decline was evident. Muscle mass continued to decrease. Standing became difficult. He spent most hours lying flat to reduce strain. Despite this, he avoided entering the water except when absolutely necessary. Sharks remained present, though they no longer provoked a strong response. Their movement became part of the environment. There was no clear moment of crisis or collapse. Instead, survival narrowed, options reduced. Each decision carried greater consequence. Lim's focus remained limited to immediate tasks. He did not plan for rescue or landfall. He maintained the raft, fished when possible, and waited through periods of inactivity. At some point during the 4th month, the water changed in color. Floating vegetation appeared intermittently. Birds became more numerous. These were not interpreted as signs of land with certainty. They were observations, nothing more. The raft continued to drift westward. Lim's endurance persisted without visible reinforcement. There was no confirmation that survival would continue. The ocean offered no reassurance. Each day ended without resolution, and each morning began under the same conditions. On April 5, 1943, after more than 4 months at sea, the raft entered coastal waters near the mouth of the Amazon River. The change was gradual. The swell altered. The water carried debris from inland sources. Birds flew in larger numbers and with more regular patterns. The raft drifted closer to shore without deliberate action. Lim first observed land as a low line on the horizon. There was no immediate response from the coast. The raft continued to move with the current until it grounded near the Brazilian shoreline. The water was shallow enough for Lim to step off the raft and wade toward land. His movement was slow and unsteady. He had difficulty standing and required several attempts to reach firm ground. Local fishermen discovered him shortly afterward. They assisted him without resistance or confusion. Lim was transported inland for medical attention. His weight had dropped significantly. He was dehydrated and physically weakened, but there were no critical injuries that required immediate surgical intervention. Lim had survived 133 days alone at sea. Medical examination confirmed the length of his exposure and the extent of his physical decline. Recovery took time, but was not complicated by long-term organ damage. His survival was documented by British authorities and later studied by maritime organizations. There was no public celebration at the time of his rescue. The war continued. Shipping losses remained high. Lim's survival was recorded as an exception rather than an outcome to be expected. Poon Lim's experience entered maritime history quietly. It was later reviewed by naval survival experts and incorporated into training materials for lifeboat procedures. His methods were noted for their restraint and efficiency rather than for innovation. The emphasis was placed on rationing, adaptation, and consistency under isolation. Lim did not return to long-distance maritime work. After the war, he emigrated to the United States. Changes to immigration law made his settlement possible in part because of the attention his survival had received. He lived without public recognition and did not seek to define himself by the incident. The raft no longer exists. The ocean that carried it continues unchanged. Lim's survival did not alter maritime risk, nor did it reduce the danger faced by others at sea. It remains a documented case of endurance within fixed limits, shaped by environment rather than defiance. The record endures because it required nothing beyond patience, restraint, and time.